G'day and welcome back to Reality Check. I am, as you know, your host, Ross Coulthart, and pleased to announce we've made it back into the top 50 US podcasts. Thank you so much for your support. Now, of course, since we last engaged, there has been, of course, the release of documents, data, videos, imagery on the war.gov/UFOs website, which at last count had hundreds of millions of hits. If the Pentagon was hoping it could put the genie back into the bottle on the subject of UAPs by releasing such, quite frankly, an underwhelming release of documents and information, it's not going to work. And one of the things we've released in the interim was an earlier Reality Check interview I did with Dr. Manali Max Derakhshani about lunar anomalies that were detected on the lunar surface by NASA's own imagery and surveillance platforms. And this has been such a popular segment, we've brought Dr. Max Derakhshani back because we have more. Max, we've got more, not only on lunar anomalies, but also on anomalies in orbit. And before I bring you in, I was really struck. I was talking to former NASA study team member, Dr. Mike Gold, who's now with Redwire Space, and he acknowledged to me that the terms of reference for NASA's study team limited them very much to aerial or terrestrial UAPs. The whole idea, the whole area of NASA's imagery from the moon and from shuttle missions seems to have been quite deftly excluded from the study team's purview. And I wonder whether that was deliberate. And I'll invite the audience to make a decision on that at the end of this conversation that you and I have today. Max, welcome back to Reality Check. I think this is your fourth time on the show. It's terrific to have you back. What would you like to take us through today? Firstly, can I get your response to the lunar anomalies revelations that were described in the most recent war.gov/UFOs release?
Well, thank you again, Ross, for having me back on your show. It's a great honor always to be here. In terms of the Department of War's release, first tranche of UAP UFO files, I am pleased to see that they surprised us by including a number of files from NASA. But I noticed that a number of anomalies along the same lines of what they published were left out, and it's a bit curious to me. As well, I think that they could have used better quality imaging, or they could have released maybe better quality images to the public of the lunar UAP. But what they released is legitimate. It's in the archives. It's just not the best quality imaging, and I'm hoping in the future they'll maybe.
What was left out, Max?
Well, for example, one of the Apollo images they showed from Apollo 17 of this triangular arrangement of blue lights, they showed the scanned version from, I believe, the U.S. National Archives. However, NASA has an archive of more recent scans of the Apollo films. It's managed by Arizona State University and the Johnson Space Center. It's called the March to the Moon Archive. And there you can download a 1.3 gigabyte TIFF file of that particular image. And you can get a much higher resolution version of the trio of blue lights in the black lunar sky. And you can see more visibly the detailed structure in the lights. And in fact, in our interview, I think the second one, I showed at least the PNG, or one of the second to highest quality version of that, and did some upscalings and analysis.
Now, I was really struck in the commentary that was attached by the Department of War to that Apollo 17 3-dot image. They didn't say it was three objects. They actually used the term potentially a physical object, singular. Do you have any idea why they could have reached at that conclusion? I mean, the implication, of course, is that what we're looking at is a triangular craft with 3-dot lights in each corner.
Yeah, I think that is that is a plausible inference to make because there are a number of reasons. One is that the individual blue lights are about the same size, virtually the same size, virtually equally separated from one another in distance, and they occupy an extremely small area of the black lunar sky, so that prosaic explanations along the lines of maybe cosmic rays bombarding the film become highly implausible, or much less plausible than maybe some other types of potential photo defects could be. And as well, there are multiple scans of that particular frame in different NASA and US military and US government archives, which show this trio of blue lights in exactly the same configuration in exactly the same place, which rules out scanning artifacts. So when you start thinking about possible prosaic explanations, you quickly see that very few of them are plausible. And so one has to consider the possibility that these are part of some sort of physical object in the lunar sky. And then they said that they acquired the original film and they're going to do further analyses, both NASA and I guess the Department of War, and then they'll let us know what they find.
Looking at this high resolution image, it really does make you wonder why the Pentagon chose to provide such a lower resolution image for public consumption on the Department of War website when they've had this image all along, and presumably so has NASA. It does beg the question, Max. Do you think NASA's been deceitful with the public when Bill Nelson, perhaps advised improperly by staff that knew the real story, but as the NASA administrator at the time, Bill Nelson basically said there was no evidence of any anomalous UAPs in any of the NASA imagery that can't possibly be sustained in light of even what was released last week, can it?
I agree. It can't be rationally sustained. So there are only two possibilities as far as I can see. Either Bill Nelson was completely uninformed. He never looked into the archives himself in any detail. Maybe his advisors were uninformed, and their advisors were uninformed, or people knew and they just refused to tell him what is in the archives, right? Or he knows what's in the archives, NASA's archives, and he just decided to lie to the public.
Do you think do you think NASA has lied without saying specifically that it's Bill Nelson? I was told by one person that Bill may very well not have been briefed. Do you believe there is a deceit going on inside NASA, that it's been withholding imagery that does show potential imagery that suggests non-human intelligence?
Well, it's tricky, potentially, but see, there are a number of images of anomalies in NASA's archives which are simply left there, unexplained, unaddressed, undiscussed. So it would seem that there are at times anomalies left in their imaging of the moon, which they just follow a policy of don't ask, don't tell on, and who knows why exactly they do that. I mean, I guess you could say that the fact that they don't address them and explain what they are to the public is a kind of deceit. And then if we think of, we have some whistleblowers who've previously worked for NASA who suggest or imply that the intentions of certain missions, like the Clementine mission, was different from what was publicly stated. And for example, Dr. John Brandenburg. So if that's true, then that is a kind of deceit. And then we have, of course, many instances of anomalies in their LRO imaging, which are difficult to see in maybe the more publicly available images. And so, yeah, deceit is a possibility, and it would also match with their mandate from I guess, the Space Act of 1958 and the Brookings Report's suggestion or recommendation to consider withholding any information of potential ET artifacts or technology in the solar system because of the political and cultural and religious ramifications. So, yeah, that's a possible scenario.
To quickly deal, and I know you can rebut this, Professor Avi Loeb from the Galileo project he speculated that the blue lights that were seen in the imagery from the Apollo 12 and Apollo 17 missions, and by the way, I should mention here, they also featured in Edgar Mitchell's Apollo 14 mission from Edgar's own account. He tried to suggest that those lights were camera artifacts or perhaps caused by diffraction of dust inside the lens somehow. I don't think that's plausible because I know Edgar Mitchell admitted that he has seen these objects himself with his own eyes. And he told friends, including a very close friend of mine, about it and said, I saw those blue images. They followed us out and they followed us back and they followed us while we were on the moon. What's your take?
Yeah, I should mention I actually showed Avi that trio of blue lights Apollo image several months ago in a private briefing, and as well as other Apollo imaging of triangular shaped UAP in the lunar sky from Apollo 11 and Apollo 12. So he has previously seen this data. In terms of his prosaic explanation, I think that that is a very contrived, prosaic explanation of the UAP anomaly in the Apollo 17 image. I've heard him say in another podcast that he thinks it might be due to some internal reflection in the optics, or maybe reflection of something inside the lunar module because the photograph was taken from behind, within the lunar module through the window. The problem with that is that if there were some blue lights on some dashboard inside the lunar module,
I can cut you off there. I know there weren't. I've actually checked this when I was writing my book. One of the things that I wrote about was the blue lights on the lunar surface. And I asked people with a detailed knowledge of the lunar module whether there were any blue lights in the lunar module control panel, and there were not. Absolutely, categorically, no blue lights.
Well, that's it's a good confirmation to have. And in addition, I would just note that there were actually a sequence of images taken from the lunar module in that includes the frame with the blue lights anomaly, and those other images taken through the window do not show the same anomaly. So if it was some sort of internal reflection from something in the lunar module, I think they should show up in the other frames, and they do not. In addition to that, in terms of like cosmic ray bombardment of, I don't know, the camera or something to that effect, I mean, the fact that they occupy such a small area of the black lunar sky, that they're very well defined blue lights, that they are the same size and equally distant from each other, more or less, makes a sort of cosmic ray bombardment explanation, I think, highly unlikely, because you would have to postulate that cosmic rays just happen to strike the film in this very, very tiny area without producing any blurring or streaking, and in just this triangular configuration, and that doesn't seem to me particularly plausible. And then I would just add that in terms of scanning artifacts, well, that is not really plausible because we have multiple scans showing the exact same anomaly. So it can't be a scanning artifact if different scanners from different decades show the same thing. In terms of, people have suggested, well, the Hasselblad cameras had this issue that when they were taking a photograph, they would produce like a static electric discharge that could then produce electrical sparks in the film. That appears to be true, but if you look at the archives, NASA discusses this. All the examples they give of that look absolutely nothing whatsoever like any of these blue light phenomena. And furthermore, in NASA's own archives, like the March to the Moon archive with the highest quality resolution images, they are completely mute in terms of giving any explanation as to what these blue light anomalies are in their own photographs. They say nothing about it one way or the other. So I think if there were a prosaic explanation along the lines that Avi has, I think, sort of vaguely suggested, it would have been thoroughly explained by NASA by now.
It really is quite incredible that we're over half a century now since those incredible lunar emissions, one of the greatest achievements in human history. And there are still these unsolved mysteries relating to objects that we can now confirm for sure were seen by astronauts on the surface of the moon in the 1960s and the 1970s. And we just don't have an answer for it. And I just find it incredible that now the Department of War has acknowledged that these are potentially, at least one of them, is potentially a physical object. And I'm intrigued as to why not NASA, the Department of War, has made that specific finding about that particular object. It's only made that declaration with that one Apollo 17 three-dotted image. And it does make me wonder if they know something more. Were they deploying radar or something like that that gave them the ability to determine that this was a solid object? I'm sure in coming months, hopefully, we'll start getting some answers. So, Max, one of the other things that was raised, of course, were the early Gemini astronaut crew transcripts, including one, I think, where a bogey was described. And let's talk about potential bogeys involving the Gemini missions, the Apollo missions, and the shuttle missions. I know you've got something for us. Where do you want to go next? Let's talk about potential bogeys involving the Gemini missions, the Apollo missions, and the shuttle missions. I know you've got something for us. Where do you want to go next?
The space shuttle missions have there are a couple of very interesting videos from the two space shuttle missions, STS-48 in 1991 and STS-80 in 1996, which show a lot of what we might call bogeys, and some of which seem to exhibit propulsive capabilities that are vastly beyond what is capable with any known form of human propulsion technology.
Now, let's put up the STS-48 video. I think you've got it there, haven't you? I'd like to get that up. This is one of my favorite shuttle anomalies. And the reason why will soon become obvious, because I suspect it has an Australian connection. And I start my book in plain sight, Dr. Max Derakhshani, at the location known as the Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Station, which is located in Northwest Cape in northwestern Australia. And I strongly suspect that the STS-48 mission that you're about to show us took place during this UFO incident directly over or very, very close to Northwest Cape while the shuttle was in orbit overhead.
Yes, so let me then show you this clip. Just to give a brief context, this is the raw footage of the STS-48 mission acquired by Don Ratch from NASA Select TV in the 1990s. So this is the original footage, and I will expand to full screen. This was posted on the YouTube channel of Dr. Mark Carlotto. Dr. Carlotto is a colleague of mine at the Society for Planetary SETI Research. He's also done a lot of work on lunar and Mars anomalies over the decades. And he's also analyzed this particular video extensively, as I'll show. So he posted this on YouTube, which anybody can go and watch. It's about...
And so this is point of view from a camera on the space shuttle STS-48, correct?
Yes, correct. So the camera is located in the cargo bay of the space shuttle. And so the camera is pointing towards the air glow of Earth. So this is the air glow, the boundary between space and the edge of the atmosphere of Earth. This is the horizon of the Earth, which seems to be populated by clouds. And these we'll see are arrays of clouds and lights on the surface of the Earth.
So what you see is an object that appears to be maneuvering above planet Earth in orbit. And then you see what looks like a beam of light come from Earth.
Yes, that's going to come up shortly. There are a number of white dots in this image that are moving. along with the main object of interest, the main UAP. Some of these might be ice debris, but some of them do not seem to conform to that behavior. But the main object of interest will be popping up here. Should be any second. I apologize if it's a little bit slow. It seems that the film is taking a little while to. Okay, there it is. So it popped out from there. Let me just take a few steps back. So it popped out from right here.
Yep.
It's moving along what appears to be the horizon of the Earth at a virtually constant speed, it would seem. And now at the bottom left, as you said, there is a flash of light, and then it just suddenly shoots off, passes through the air glow, and goes into space. And there are other objects here that are also moving in different trajectories.
Now, I know there's been an attempt at a rebuttal by, I think it was Dr. James Oberg, a notorious skeptic debunker, and he suggested that these were ice particles that had come from the thrusters on the shuttle, and that what you were seeing were thruster maneuvers that were causing the movement of ice particles. Is that a plausible explanation?
Well, that is I think, a plausible first guess. However, when you look more closely at the details of this particular video, I think one quickly sees that the available data in the video do not fit that explanation well at all.
Run us through it again. I want to see the flash of light as well.
So this is another version of the video by Donald Ratch, the person who originally found the raw footage or copied it from NASA Select TV in 1991. So now he's highlighting where exactly the UAP is going to pop up. It pops up there, seemingly out of nowhere, moves along the horizon, and then we'll see the flash of light from the bottom left, and then this thing will respond by darting off at a 45-degree angle, seemingly out into space, seemingly.
And just what strikes me as interesting, I'm glad you got it there. There appears to be a beam of light that comes flying up from the planet immediately after that broad flash. Could you show that again?
So yes, there's a beam of light, and then there are two projectiles that are shot off, which he points to here. Let me go a little bit further back so that it's easier to see. Okay, bottom left, there will be a flash of light, and then two projectiles will
bang.
One is there, as you can see.
Wow.
The other one is over there, less visible, but it's there. And the main UAP, as we can see, that's moving along at a constant speed, it actually stops for half a second, as determined by Dr. Jack Kasher, before it darts off. That doesn't fit the behavior of an ice particle, as Kasher showed extensively in his analysis of this footage. The main NASA explanation, I should say, is that these are ice debris particles that are pushed away by the space shuttle's attitude adjuster rocket, or attitude thruster, which is one of the thrusters that the space shuttle actually has.
Do you find any of that explanation plausible? I've spent a lot of time reading this material and looking at these videos, and I'm intrigued because I am pursuing, I'll let our audience know, I am pursuing strong speculative suggestions that there was a facility built while the Americans were at Northwest Cape and in full possession of the Northwest Cape Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Site that was nominally operated jointly with Australia. It was essentially treated from 66 through to about 1991 as sovereign American territory. And I have spoken to witnesses who illegally went inside the facility whilst it was under American control. And they tell me that there was a gigantic concrete platform with What they disturbed was a metal door in the middle of it. When they opened that door, when they lifted it, they could see a long tube tunnel down which they saw flashing lights. And as soon as the lights were activated, they ran and bolted out of the complex. But essentially, when the facility was handed back to Australia in 1991 and brought back within the sovereign control of the Australian military, it's still operated by Americans and Australians. That particular area of the Northwest Cape Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Site was bulldozed. Somebody had removed that concrete facility and filled it in before it was returned to the Australians. I've spoken to people in the Australian military and intelligence community who've told me that there is no explanation forthcoming from the Americans about what that specific site was used for, but they confirmed that they were aware as well about that particular facility and that it was an area that Australians were not allowed to go to inside their own country. It really does beg the question in my mind, and this is totally speculative on my part, were the Americans experimenting with some kind of directed energy weapon at the Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Station, which is actually used mainly for the broadcast of very low frequency radio signals to nuclear attack submarines in the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, and in the Malacca area around Singapore. It's not generally used for any kind of offensive capacity. It's essentially a defense facility for the monitoring and broadcasting of radio waves to American nuclear attack submarines. Do you agree, Dr. Max Derakhshani, that that beam of light appears to come from that Northwest Cape, Australia area?
According to the video of it, we see that it seems to be coming, or the projectiles, or at least one of them, seems to come perpendicular to the space shuttle, or it seems to at least move in the direction of the object of interest, the main UAP. And if
so it's coming from the surface.
It seems like that, or it seems like it could plausibly be doing that. It's a bit hard to say because we can't see for sure exactly where they originate, but they certainly do seem like they could be originating from the surface. And if we look at where the space shuttle was passing by, this is Dr. Carlotto's paper on the STS-48 UAP incident. He notes that the event considered in this paper occurred when the shuttle was passing near the western coast of Australia. And he shows this diagram with the approximate location of the event here. So if there is
that is very close orbit-wise to Northwest Cape. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Now, it should be said that there are a number of what seem to be what the military calls fast walkers, or projectiles that move extremely fast, in subsequent space shuttle videos, and even in the STS-48 fully uncut version. So it's hard to say for sure if this projectile that seemed to be crossing the air globe was actually coming from the surface, or if it was maybe coming across, or who knows what exactly. But it's possible.
I noticed you made the point, though, that wherever that perceived movement of a projectile came from, it was perpendicular to the shuttle. So it didn't come from the shuttle.
It appears to be that way. Yeah, I mean, it is hard to see how it could come from the shuttle from a thruster plume, given the orientation of the shuttle. I would want to emphasize that the behavior of the main UAP of interest that we saw a moment ago is in itself anomalous enough that even if we don't know the origin of those projectiles, just by examining the motion of the main UAP, we can already deduce a number of anomalous properties that seem to defy conventional propulsion physics as we know it.
Now, it's interesting to me This STS video that you're talking about, that yourself, Dr. Mark Carlotto, and others have taken a close interest in, it didn't feature in the UAPs released by the War Department last week. NASA would take the view that this is merely ice particles, and that's presumably why it hasn't been categorized as a UAP by NASA. NASA's never really addressed, though, the questions that have been raised by Dr. Mark Carlotto, yourself, or other commentators, have they?
Not officially. I mean, the most that NASA has commented on this officially is specified here by Carlotto, who just quotes NASA's official response to this video. So he says, within days, Mr. Ratch, the person who found this film on NASA Select TV, provided his copies of the original recordings along with detailed descriptions of 4 anomalous events to various investigators, including NASA. 2 months later, after reviewing, NASA agreed with his descriptions but disagreed with his interpretations. They sent an official statement. The objects seen are orbiter-generated debris illuminated by the sun. The flicker of light is the result of firing of the attitude thrusters on the orbiter, and the abrupt motions of the particles result from the impact of gas jets from the thruster. There is one person from NASA, James Oberg, who has had some back and forth with Dr. Carlotto, as well as my colleague Jack Kasher, who also wrote this really extensive study of the STS-48 video. But he seemed to do this basically on his own, not necessarily officially on behalf of NASA. NASA's official response seems to just be limited to that statement and what they told the House Committee on Space Science and Technology at the time. And so that's been the extent of it, of their response. But there are anomalies or problems with that explanation that have been made very clear by Dr. Kasher, Dr. Carlotto, Mike Barra, Richard Hoagland, in various places that I've never seen any satisfactory explanation for from NASA or any NASA scientists or engineers.
So would you like to see these anomalies included in anomalies that ought properly to be being investigated by any oversight committee?
Absolutely. I think actually that this particular footage, once it's appreciated how implausible the ice debris pushed by thruster gases explanation is actually even more striking and compelling as evidence for of extraterrestrial technology in orbit than, for example, the Pentagon videos that have been released up to this point. The key in all of this is that if you can show that the main UAP of interest in the video is far from the shuttle and close to the horizon, then you can already show that the propulsive capabilities are vastly beyond anything that humans are capable of, either then or today. And just to show you this table that Dr. Kasher produced that illustrates the propulsive capabilities.
We'll put this link up at the end of the show. I think it'd be important for our audience to have a look at this in full and make their own judgment, and also read the various papers, including James Oberg's rebuttal.
Yeah, people should ultimately decide for themselves. This is a chart of the calculated accelerations of the main UAP after the flash, depending on distance from the shuttle and the final velocity reached by the main UAP.
Wow.
So if the UAP was 1 mile away from the shuttle, the top acceleration was 10.5 g-forces and final velocity of 250 miles per hour. If it was at the horizon, then the acceleration would have to be 18,000 Gs and a final velocity of around 430,000 miles per hour. Anything from 100 miles up to the horizon indicates propulsive capabilities vastly beyond anything that humans are capable of with rockets, jets, magnetohydrodynamics, anything of the kind, and would require exotic propulsive capabilities that we physicists only like theoretically speculate and talk about when we talk about warp drive solutions and general relativity theory. And the important point here is that you are able to actually deduce from the video information in the STS-48 footage that the main object of interest cannot possibly be 10 miles away or even 100 miles away, but has to be much more like 1,000 or at the horizon miles away.
Which indicates then that we really are dealing with technologies far beyond known human ken.
Yes, exactly. And so all of this hinges on how close is that main UAP to the shuttle. If you can answer that question and you can show that it's at 100 miles or further away from the shuttle, which I would argue that you can, and I think Carlotto, Kasher, and Hoagland and others have provided ample evidence to that conclusion, then the astonishing conclusion about the accelerations and final velocity and the propulsive capabilities, all of that follows just from determining that one thing: how far away is the UAP from the space shuttle? And so this is, I think, one of the most powerful examples that we have currently, and it's in the public record. It's not some classified video with classified radar or anything like that.
Sure. Okay, so is that STS-48 wrapped there, Max, or do you want to say some more on STS-48 before we move on?
The point I wanted to make is that the main UAP of interest, when it cuts, so if it is just an ice particle that's coming out of the space shuttle's shadow and into sunlight, as Oberg and NASA have suggested, then there's a problem with that explanation, because when it finally makes that right angle turn, and here is the main object of interest, when it finally makes that, not right angle, but 45-degree angle abrupt turn, it crosses the airglow boundary and it brightens, and then it dims out as it's going into space, or as it's crossing the airglow boundary into the blackness of space.
Yeah. I don't know. I honestly, looking at that again, Max, I don't for the life of me know how anybody could plausibly assert that that is an ice crystal somehow close to the thrusters of the space shuttle. It is clearly at a huge distance from the space shuttle, closer to the horizon than it is to the shuttle.
I think so. And you wouldn't expect it to dim out like that if it was moving, if it was close to the shuttle and just crossing like that. It should still be brightly illuminated as it's moving through the background of across the blackness of space above the atmosphere. But it doesn't do that. So that's one immediate way that people can see that that explanation is frankly nonsensical.
So I wonder if it is true. I mean, the implications of that are really quite extraordinary, because if it is true that the object, whatever it is intelligently evading some kind of weaponry, propulsion, system, projectile system being directed at it from Earth, it suggests that someone, perhaps the United States, is acting offensively against non-human intelligences.
Either that's one possibility. The other possibility that some people have suggested is that maybe this is some sort of exotic propulsion technology that the United States has, for example, that it was doing a test run on, maybe with some sort of weapon from the surface of the Earth, like maybe located at some military facility in Australia, and they were testing to see if it could outmaneuver.
And look, just for the record here, Max, I will tell you that I'm in touch with members of the Aboriginal communities across Northwest Cape, and intriguingly, they report there's a long history going back decades of anomalous, mainly triangular craft operating in the Northwest Cape region of Australia, that they've seen themselves in communities right across the desert there. And we're talking about communities that are very, very remote, thousands of kilometres from anywhere, really. And they've been very kind to these communities. It's got around that Ross Coulthart's interested in this subject matter. There are Aboriginal communities in touch with a good friend of mine who's basically talking to them on the ground there. And they've expressed their willingness to be interviewed about what they've been seeing. And I'm hoping to get out there with a film crew fairly soon. Not at this time of the year, apparently. The best time of the year is when it's a little cooler. But when it's not 40 or 50 degrees centigrade, I'll be going out there with a film crew and hopefully getting to meet some of these communities that have actually been seeing, in some cases, block-sized, huge apartment blocks, supermarket-sized triangular objects that have been maneuvering over their communities, in some cases in absolute silence.
That's very interesting. I would love to see more information about that and see if there's any sort of cross-checking that can be done with the STS-48 incident. NASA, not NASA, but the US military has, or had at the time, a system of spy satellites called the DSP satellites, which there is some evidence to indicate did have data tracking what they call fast walkers, or anomalous objects that come from deep space at hypersonic velocities, either go into orbit around Earth or enter the atmosphere or enter and leave the atmosphere again. And I would love someday to be able to see if the DSP satellite system tracked a fast walker precisely where the main UAP in STS-48 was located at that particular time.
I actually have James Richardson's book on the DSP program, the Defence Support Program, and I can tell you there are fast walkers that have been seen over Australia, and I know the downlinks for the DSP satellites came through Pine Gap, which is a base in the middle of Australia, and I have spoken to people who have confirmed to me that they have seen data pertaining to observations over Australia from those DSP satellites. As I understand it, they've now been superseded by far more modern satellite systems, but the Australia still remains, I think, very much the focus of America's primary defence facilities for the monitoring of potential ballistic missile launches. And so there are satellites in orbit that allow for the capture of any flash of light from the hot exhaust, the very visible exhaust of a rocket. And Australia plays a very key role in watching out for those illuminations, particularly with the naughty North Koreans.
That's very interesting. It's actually worth noting as well that Carlotto himself does say that there is some sort of correlation between the DSP satellite data at the time over that region of the Earth and what was seen in STS-48. And he actually gives a reference for this in his research paper on the topic. So there's probably something there to track down even further, to really pin down. Like if we could have the video footage from STS-48 and the raw data from this DSP satellite system at the time and match the two together.
So what we're going to now, as I understand it, Max, is STS-80, Shuttle Mission 80, which was, I think you said, in 1996. Just talk us through what we're going to see here as you're bringing the data up.
This is STS-48 from Mark Carlotto's YouTube channel again. Now, this is the raw footage provided by this gentleman. He mentions Starling Price. And so, yeah, let's take a look. So this is the air glow boundary. This is the horizon. The whole area here is actually out of sunlight. So this is in darkness, and the only source of illumination here is the moon. And so what we see here, these diffuse glowing areas, these are clouds being reflecting moonlight. And then we see ocean, and we see land as well. And you see these are city lights. And I believe Carlotto determines that this is probably Puerto Rico. So looking from this view from the space shuttle, I guess around 350 something miles high. We're looking down at Puerto Rico. And now watch what happens. Let's go to, this is another view so we can see this, right? So these are the city lights. These are clouds. He zooms in to this area on Puerto Rico, gets a little closer. And let me skip ahead a little bit more. And now watch over here. Something is going to pop up out of nowhere, seemingly.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
This tadpole-like thing over here just pops up, flies into the video description information here on the top left, and then seems to disappear.
So do you perceive that as coming from the surface of the Earth, or is it somewhere else in orbit?
Well, Carlotto himself speculates that it could be either coming from up from the clouds or from the ocean itself, so the surface itself. But it's hard to say. I mean, I think that it is not likely coming up from the ocean or moving through the ocean, rather, because if you look at it in slow motion, so if we were to, for example, slow this playback speed down so that we can see it develop more slowly, let's say at half speed, I think you can see that not only is it much brighter than the background clouds, it's actually similar in brightness to the lights, the city lights.
It looks almost plasmatic. I wonder whether it's one of these plasma life forms that some people have been speculating about in the upper atmosphere and Earth orbit.
It would be hard for me to say. It certainly looks plasmoid-like. It looks like a tadpole of some sort with a tail. And there you go. You see it just seemingly pop out of nowhere, wiggle across. And again, in terms of propulsive capabilities, Dr. Carlotto has analyzed this footage. Apologies, in this paper from 2005, I believe it was published. Yes. And he actually calculates that this object is moving at, he calls it F1, and he has a time-lapse sequence photographs for this object of interest. He calculates propulsive capabilities or accelerations for this F1 object that are also vastly beyond anything that humans can possibly engineer. The other thing is that if it is actually moving as fast as Carlotto calculates, and let me see if I can pin down the particular speed that he calculates from the video information.
500 miles a second.
500 miles a second, yeah. So if you convert that to miles per hour, I believe that would end up being over 1 million miles per hour.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. It's interesting too, because the suggestion in that imagery is that the NASA astronaut, whoever was taking that imagery, they knew to anticipate that the object was about to do what it did. So why did the NASA astronaut point the camera at that particular portion of the coastline around Antigua, Puerto Rico, presumably knowing that that tadpole-like plasmatic object was about to emerge?
Again, it's a great question. It seems to almost suggest that the astronaut or the camera operator was aware that this thing would appear there. And I mean, he pans up after it appears and seems to look in the direction where it went to see if he could still find it. But
yeah,
it's not there. And that raises a question, right? If we have this case and STS-48, and who knows what other missions in between, are astronauts told to look out for something? And it's not just there, but I mean, we can go even further along. For example, if we go to the 7:10 mark or so, perhaps I should back this up a little bit. Right over here in this cloud area, something is going to just appear, a disc-shaped thing.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Just going to start moving seemingly away from the shuttle in the direction towards Earth. And it just continues moving on.
It almost looks like it's got a dome in the middle of it, like a nipple in the middle of it.
Yeah, or like a hole or of some kind. And again, I gotta say, in terms of the propulsive, not necessarily this one, but the other UAP that we saw, the tadpole-like one, if it was actually in the atmosphere moving at 500 miles a second, the kinetic energy it would have would be so great that it would produce a massive, like, thermonuclear fireball in the atmosphere of Earth. Yet that
it would also, if humans were inside such a craft and they were feeling the G-forces, they'd be pea soup, basically.
Yeah, there is no possible way it could be a manned craft of any kind. So I'm thinking that whatever propulsive capabilities it has are extremely exotic, beyond anything that humans can possibly devise or develop. Or maybe it appeared in space above Earth itself, above the atmosphere, and then it wiggled like that, and then, I don't know, disappeared again.
So, Max, would you like to see this video as well investigated by any congressional oversight committee that's looking at these anomalies in space?
Oh, absolutely. This is absolutely another one worthy of further investigation. And let me also note, by the way, here you're going to see a trio of these bogies, you might say. And note that the camera operator, is going to zoom in on them.
So he's obviously they've obviously caught his attention.
Yeah. So now he's panning towards them. If I speed this up a little bit more, and they're moving seemingly autonomously in different directions. So now he's focusing in on them. One seems to be moving towards Earth, but the other one seems to be staying above the atmosphere. Now two of them are moving, but this one is staying here. There's another projectile that moves across at extremely high speeds. And yeah, let me note that one of the astronauts on this very mission, he actually has a blog. His name is Tom Jones, and he wrote about STS-48. This is his blog in
STS-80. STS-80.
Excuse me, yes, STS-80. This was the Space Shuttle Columbia, and he said, "Did UFOs visit STS-80?" So he posted this statement. During the week of April 2011, the FBI released some of its investigation records on UFOs. The reports reflect the reality that people see. Okay, so he says, much UFO speculation in the past has focused on one of my shuttle missions, STS-80, flown in late 1996. And he goes through this, and he ends up saying that as far as I remember, nobody on the crew was looking out the window at these ice crystals or debris particles. Nobody thought anything that our crew observed out the window was of alien origin or something not connected to the shuttle's routine operations. Once you understand what the solar illumination conditions are, it's easy to conclude that the video shows normal ice, small ice and debris particles drifting aimlessly away from the orbiter, with some pieces becoming sunlit as they move out of the shuttle's shadow.
So what do you say? What do you say about that? I mean, it certainly doesn't look like that's what we're talking about here.
It doesn't look like that at all. And on further analysis, I think, for example, Carlotta's analysis shows clearly that it doesn't fit that explanation at all.
And more importantly, there is clearly one astronaut with a camera who's obviously very interested in what those objects are and zooming in on them intentionally because they find them interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And he just Simply says these are just videos are records of normal space shuttle operations and optical phenomena, so nothing to see here. But I think any honest observer can say there's a lot to see there, and that is not a satisfactory explanation at all. So, yeah, I do hope that the current NASA leadership and Department of War will reassess these videos, or at least release them to the public for the public to decide for themselves.
There are other videos as well. I mean, I know, is it Story Musgrave? One of the astronauts has talked about these weird plasmatic snake-like objects that he said came up near the cockpit window when he was on his shuttle mission. The number of which I've forgotten, but there've been repeated insinuations by astronauts that it's uncomfortable for them to talk about these things. Do you suspect that they're told not to?
Well, I suspect that is actually very likely. In connection with Story Musgrave and STS-80, actually, Carlotto says this interesting tidbit. According to James Oberg, quote, when I asked crewman Story Musgrave, who is not shy about talking about anomalies of any kind, he assured me he saw nothing unusual on the flight STS-80. He was one of the other astronauts at this point or any other. So that raises a question. Did Musgrave see this himself, or was he told to stay quiet? It's hard to believe that if he was looking at this footage, he wouldn't say, that's really weird, or there are a number of strange things there. And we know other astronauts like Leroy Chow, who was another space shuttle astronaut. He's on record saying in one of these NASA Unexplained File episodes of the Science Channel that when you're an astronaut, you have to be very careful about what you say in terms of what you see in space, if you see anything weird, if you want to fly again on future missions. He says that point blank. And
well, I can only repeat what Edgar Mitchell told my very dear friend, the spaceman, who was a very close friend of Edgar Mitchell, who prefers anonymity. And he's told me how Edgar Mitchell told him one word when he was asked why he didn't speak about what he saw on the lunar surface and what followed, he believes, the Apollo 14 mission out from Earth and back to Earth. He believed that the Apollo missions were all followed by intelligently guided craft. And indeed, I've spoken to other people who've told me that even the members of Apollo 13 were aware that they were being followed and probably benevolently protected. I do wonder, though, whether it's true what Edgar Mitchell said. When he was asked about this, he said one word: treason. He was told that it was treason to talk about these things. So I do have a worry, and I'd love to see Congress asking these individual astronauts the hard questions. It would be a dream of mine to see some of these astronauts that have stuck their necks out and been involved in some of these incidents actually being asked on the record under oath and seeing whether they're prepared to reveal anything to a congressional oversight committee in the proper context. Max, this is great. This is fascinating. I suspect we're going to get another reaction from our audience that we've had to all the lunar anomalies. Do you want to leave it there today, or are there others that you want to raise today?
These were the two shuttle videos that I wanted to highlight. There are a couple of others, STS-75 and STS-78, that are interesting as well. But these are, in my opinion, the two most compelling examples. And I noted that Lou Elizondo, who was on your show on the day of the first tranche release, he said, wait until you see the space shuttle videos. I wonder if he was referring to STS-48 and STS-80, and if he knows something about what the Department of War is going to release next in connection with this.
Well, at the time you and I are speaking, we're still waiting to find out whether Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who's one of the principals of the UAP caucus, doing a heroic job in pushing for the disclosure of about 46 videos that have been requested from the Defense Department, to find out whether or not she's going to get access to those videos. I just note very briefly that Jeremy Corbell, in his excellent new film, which I watched last night, Sleeping Dogs, it's basically got 8 of the as yet unreleased images from these videos. And there's one in particular, which I'm going to call Casper's Ghost. It's quite extraordinary. It appears to show some kind of plasmatic humanoid shaped plasmatic object moving really strangely. And I think full credit to Jeremy for the great work that he's got in persuading his sources to part with that material. I do think there's going to be some explaining in the next opportunity for congressional hearings. And I sincerely hope that NASA, through with its new administrator, is brought up to account and asked to explain how it was that it's said consistently for so many decades that there is no evidence of any kind of anomalous phenomena. And yet here we have quite clearly anomalous phenomena that have been raised as such by the Department of War, not by us, the Apollo 17 dots in particular, as a physical object. And we have to ask NASA. I'd love to see them under oath and asked why it is that they have sadly, perhaps unintentionally, misled the public for so many years. Dr. Max Derakhshani, it's always a pleasure to have you back on Reality Check. I know you and I keep on promising our audience that we're going to get eventually to Mars anomalies, and I'm looking forward to having you on to talk about Mars because that's even more fun. And I just want to flag to you, I particularly want to talk about Phobos. Max Derakhshani, let's save that for another day.
Absolutely, yes. I look forward to doing that.
Thanks very much, Max.